Thank you very much, Toastmaster of the day. Please, can you kindly confirm I can be seen and also be heard?
We can see, we can hear you, sir.
Thank you very much. Tony Robbins, an American author, coach, and motivational speaker, said, to communicate effectively, we have to realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world, and to use that understanding as a guide when communicating with others. Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters and our dear guests. Communication is the bedrock of every relationship, be it romantic, parental, or professional. And for communication to flourish, there has to be understanding. And this is where we stumble. Most of the time, we don't really understand people. And I've come to realize that we all communicate through different masks. We wear masks not to deceive others, but to navigate the world and to adapt, to protect ourselves, and to connect. 4 masks in particular have come up for me depending on the moment. The direct mask, analytical mask, supportive mask, and initiative mask. I'll tell you what I mean. A few months ago, I was at a networking event. Someone came up to me, and looked at my tag. Caliphate Times Media. So, what is Caliphate Times Media? My first instinct was to launch into a long explanation about how I come from a family of journalists and storytellers, how my co-founder has been reading newspapers ever since he could talk and his father collected them. But that moment, I chose to wear my direct mask, to be clear and concise. And I said, Caliphate Times is a startup digital media rooted in truth, focused on impact. We tell stories from northern Nigeria with clarity and pride. He smiled and nodded, inviting me to tell him more. Now that moment taught me about the power of precision, saying what matters. I found myself wearing a different mask a little earlier than that. I was in the market to buy a piece of land. I found a developer, everything looked fine until my lawyer discovered during the due diligence process a power of attorney document attached to that land that was not mentioned before. When we went back to the developers, they brushed it off. During the meeting, one of the co-founders began to name drop. He had worked at Coast Grove this, he has a reputation that so many people have already subscribed this. And they even went ahead to offer to draw up an indemnity clause to hold the owner personally liable should in case anything goes wrong, just to make me comfortable. And we left on that note. But later, I wore on my analytical mask, detail-oriented and logical. And I called the sales agent, I told him, deals off. And he asked, why? I said to him, if a power of attorney document exists, that means someone has authority over that land. And the fact that you would rather draw up new papers than to provide proof tells me that the authority over that land is unclear. And if it's unclear now, it will be chaos later. Now, while at this stage of my life, I can afford to take high risks, that one risk is too high for my appetite. And that was it. Sometimes clarity is the cleanest form of communication. But not every situation can be resolved with logic. Sometimes you need something gentler. We all know the popular saying, men are scum. We all know this. So one quiet evening, my cousin called me with another story trying to prove that point. Her voice sounded tired. And she said, maybe there's something wrong with me. My initial instinct was to launch into a long speech about how to fix it, offer solutions, but I wore on my supportive mask, calm, caring, and patient enough to let silence do the work. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. And when she was done, I said, of course, there's nothing wrong with you. You know, sometimes people's limits are just the test to show us our true strength. Now, earlier this year, my company hired new graduate trainees, very bright and eager. A few were assigned to my department. In the first few weeks, I kept checking in on them. I flooded their inboxes with templates, reports, any documents to help them connect the dots quicker. I would walk by their desks, asking them how they are settling in. I would get mostly polite nods, warm smiles, one-word answers. Then after a few weeks, I told myself to back off a bit. Let them find their rhythm on their own. I was wearing my initiating mask, the social connector trying to spark conversation. Then one afternoon, I was at my desk, deep in a spreadsheet. I felt a shadow by my side. One of the trainees stood there with laptop in his hand, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" You know, and that was it. The wall was down. You know, initiating is about openness and showing the person that you is safe to respond. Now, all of these point to different masks I had to wear to communicate. Direct when clarity mattered more than detail. Analytical when decisions were based on logic. Supportive when someone needed to be heard. And initiating when connection needed a spark. Now, my natural mask is the analytical. I like logic, structure, and measured words. But what life and leadership has taught me is that communication is not only about finding your voice. It's about knowing what masks to wear and when to change it. Because if we adapt how we communicate, we stop speaking to be heard and start speaking to be understood.